Hello and welcome to our latest Facebook Live session here at the Palais des Nations. I'm with the ILO. My name is Pete Foster, ILO, International Labour Organisation. The subject today, green jobs, and I have with me Kamal Gueye, who is the policy specialist with the Green Jobs unit of the ILO. Kamal, hello.
Hello.
Welcome. I'm glad you could be with us today. It's a great topic, this one. And I might say at the outset, because we're on Facebook and we're live, we're very interested in your perspective and your points of view, your questions for Kamal. Feel free to add them to the comments. Go to facebook.com/ILO, International Labour Organisation. You'll find it. Add your comments there, and we'll take questions during this session today. We'd really like to hear from you on this subject. Now, Kamal, there's plenty to discuss when thinking about green jobs, and in many ways it lines up with yesterday's conversation about the future of work. If you missed it, it's right there on Facebook. It's about 2 conversations down. Go and check it out for yourself, but not right now. Let's start with the immediate future. Let's talk about Sunday. Sunday is World Environment Day. The theme of that day is the fight against illegal trade in wildlife. Now, on the face of it, not huge links with the world of work, but there are implications, aren't there?
Well, absolutely. A lot of countries depend on wildlife for tourism, for livelihoods and income generation. So in many ways it is an important source of revenue, of job creation for many countries. But if you look at it on the other side, you find that to preserve biodiversity and protect forests and wildlife, there are park rangers, the forest managers, so the world of work has an important role to play in protecting wildlife and combating illegal trade in wildlife.
Well, of course, there are jobs in that industry, but the immediate one that leaps out to me is tourism. Tourism and wildlife, a very important nexus there. Give me a sense of how important tourism is to some countries in the world, associated with their wildlife, as it were.
Well, if you take a country like South Africa, tourism and travel account for nearly 10% of total employment. So we're talking of 1.5 million jobs. And if you look at it closely, you find that nature-based tourism is an important driver for that industry. And that's the same for a country like Kenya. So Kenya is said to be generating 100 times more revenue from wildlife-based tourism than other uses of wildlife. Bushmeat, for example, or other enterprises in that sector. So it's hugely important for the world of work and for countries in terms of revenues and jobs.
Okay, so we can say there are implications broader than just the intrinsic value, of course, of preserving our wildlife, which is an important part of tomorrow's day. Now, you're watching our Talk to the Experts section live here at the Palais des Nations. My name is Pete Foster from ILO Communications. I'm talking to ILO Green Jobs policy specialist, Kamal Gueye. If you're watching and you have any questions for Kamal, please add them in our comments section. Okay, now in terms of the broader conversation about work and the environment, I guess we need to start with climate change. In the broader sense, what are the implications of climate change on work and on enterprise and on the way we live?
Well, climate change is important. It is what we consider to be one of the defining challenges of the 21st century. Now, the world of work has realized that achieving our goals of advancing decent work for all, promoting jobs and protecting people will not happen in the context of unabated climate change, because we're already seeing tremendous impacts of the physical impacts of climate change, whether you look at them in terms of the typhoon that countries such as the Philippines, Bangladesh, hurricane in the United States, and right now in Europe, as we are in Paris, the
flooding.
Flooding that we're seeing today is clearly related to that. So we have now realized that unless there is decisive action against climate change, we will have greater challenges to achieve decent work for all. But on the other hand, there are major opportunities dealing with climate change. The systemic changes that we expect in the world economy offers opportunities for more decent work for many.
Okay, so that's broad brushstrokes. Before we go on, I might put a question to our audience, in fact. I might try something else here. Has climate change affected you, your work, the way you do your work? If so, we'd love to hear about that. So maybe we'll get back to you later, but if you've got an opportunity to tell us your story, please do so. Add that to the comments now. Well, as you said, there are two sides to this coin, Kamal. New challenges, new opportunities. Let's begin with the challenges. Who is going to be affected and how?
Well, when we think of the challenges of climate change, I think it's important to look at them in two ways. One is what climate change presents in terms of challenge, risks, from its physical impacts, because climate is a phenomenon, it's a natural change in the way the atmosphere functions. And that translates into what I said earlier, hurricanes, typhoon. Take a country like the Philippines. In 2014, at the very moment where climate change negotiators were talking about climate change negotiating in Lima, Typhoon Hagupit hit the Philippines, affecting 800,000 workers. And so one other important phenomenon that we're seeing is this idea of heat waves, the way that excessive heat is harming the health, the productivity of workers. And this is something that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the UN body that drives the science of climate change, has pointed to. So many countries are going to be affected, workers in particular, but also enterprises. If you look at a country like Senegal, where sea-based tourism is very important, now in one of the main tourist areas, 30% of enterprises are closing because of sea level rise, the loss of attraction for tourism. So communities, workers, as well as enterprises will all be affected in one way or another.
Well, that's a direct impact from actual climate events we're talking about there. There are obviously impacts in our reaction too. But before we get on to that, now I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you mentioned increasing hot days. Do you have any hard statistics there, any facts that you can tell us? I do remember attending an event put on by the Green Jobs Unit suggesting that the number of hot days might increase from, I think it's about 10 now in some regions of the world, to 30 a year.
No, absolutely. And again, what the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says is that if the level of heat waves continues by 2030, the impact to the world economy will be $2 trillion of loss because of losing days of work where workers can just not work because of excessive heat.
And what is the threshold? Physically, do we have a temperature in mind for excessive heat? What is excessive? I come from Australia. We sometimes get 40. That feels excessive to me.
Yes, but in general, what we're trying to have globally for climate change is keeping the average increase in temperature below 2 degrees Celsius, and then strive towards 1.5 degrees. That's what the Paris Agreement is about. Now, of course, this is contextual. For some parts of the world, people are used to working under 35, 40 degrees, but generally heat is something that everybody can experience and feel it when you cannot work in a field, in industrial premises. It's very difficult to give a threshold globally because it's context specific.
Of course. Okay. If this is you, if this has happened to you, has your work been affected by excessive heat? Are you able to work less, perhaps, than you did? Do let us know. Go through our Facebook page. Drop your comments in our comments section there. You're listening to, or you're watching, in fact, our Meet the Experts session here, Facebook Live at the Palais des Nations in Geneva. We're in the middle of the International Labour Conference, a conference that brings delegates from all over the world to discuss issues on and concerning the world of work. And of course, the concern for all of us is this issue of climate change and our reaction to it. So, you mentioned in the borders context the impact it might have. You mentioned Senegal, industries there. Let's talk now about the response, the global climate response, and how this might impact. Again, we're looking firstly at the challenges, then we might come to the opportunities.
Well, that is the other dimension. The way in which the world community is responding to climate change. And the Paris Agreement is a historic moment to start decisive action in that context. But when you see what's happening today in the world of finance, in the energy sector, you see, for example, Norwegian sovereign wealth fund announcing in last year that they're going to divest from coal investments. We're talking of $900 billion of investment going out of coal. There are major initiatives of decarbonization with a number of institutional investors. You look at a country like China, for example. In the past few years, China has closed down 4,300 coal mines because they're just so inefficient that that's the only way to deal with them and build new and more efficient plants.
So 4,300 mines, we're talking millions of workers here, aren't we?
No, in China it's close to 1.5 million workers in the coal industry that are going to lose their job. Now this is a major challenge for the world of work, because unless we find a solution for those that are going to lose from climate action, we're not addressing an important dimension of climate action, which is embedded in the Paris Agreement, this notion of a just transition. Climate action has to be driven by climate justice, and we can't have climate justice unless we have social justice. So it's very, very important.
Well, you mentioned the concept there of just transition. Now, this is a very important concept, and it's one I think we'll explore in more depth a little bit later on in our conversation. We've got a few questions coming in, and I think this is a very good one. In fact, it makes me feel like I haven't been doing my job. A question of definitions. Musa would like to know what a green job is. Let's start with that. When we talk about green jobs, what do we mean?
Well, broadly, we understand green jobs to be jobs that could be created in the agriculture sector, in industry, in the service sector, in ways that minimize to climate change. So it's very important to keep in mind that we're talking of greening of jobs, and this can happen across the entire economic sector. Now, of course, there are areas where we're looking at emerging occupations. The tremendous growth that we have now with green energy is a specific area where you can see this is a job in a clean industry. But grosso modo, green jobs are just about greening jobs, making employment advance in ways that reduce energy consumption, material efficiency, and help deal with the many environmental challenges that we face today.
Okay. There we have it, Musa. Thanks, Kamal. Very comprehensive answer. We've got a few more questions coming in here. We have one from Maria. World leaders agreed and already signed the Paris Agreement, but what can a regular person do to help against climate change? It's something we all wrestle with in our own lives. What would your advice and approach be, Kamal?
Well, Mary, that's a very important question, because I think we all have a collective responsibility to deal with climate change, but we have also individual responsibilities and small actions that we all do in the ways that we promote use of public transportation, for example, the way we make better use of energy, because energy is one of the largest sources of carbon emissions. So in the way that we make better use of energy at home, the way we try to make better consumption choices, looking at what we consume. Some products are better for the environment than others. So we have a major opportunity to all make a contribution, and collectively that will translate into the goal that world leaders have put forward to achieve.
Well, I guess you might say that the Paris Agreement itself is a triumph of the individuals, in so much the voices of all the people concerned in the world seem to be being heard by the governments, and we managed to get an incredible degree of international cooperation in a way that we really haven't experienced on this issue before. You're listening to ILO live on Facebook. Subject today is green jobs, and we're talking to Kamal Gueye, who is the green job specialist with the ILO, or one of them. We have a unit there working on this particular subject. Now, you mentioned, Kamal, this concept of social justice. I guess what we're talking about here is that a transformation is coming. This is undeniable. We have to go from where we are to where we need to be in terms of protecting the environment. But in that transformation, there are going to be winners and losers. Absolutely. On the face of it. And to get from here to there, that transition has to be managed in a just way. Now, I was going to ask you a question. I hope I haven't answered it myself. But by just transition, tell me what you think about when we say that phrase.
Well, simply say we can understand just transition as the notion by which change And here we talk about moving from an unsustainable pattern of consumption of a world economy to a low carbon economy. So that change is going to benefit all of us. And therefore, the burden that will come with that change should not be unduly on a few of us. So we have to make sure that those who are going to win, that they win. And for us, we talk of creating more and better jobs, but that those that are likely to lose, workers, industries, communities, are taken care of, so that we have a fair transition and everybody gets off positively out of that.
On the face of it, that represents a tremendous challenge. Some countries, their entire economy is predicated on the extraction of oil and petrochemicals. Entire regions, in fact, this is the basis of their economy. To manage that transition, it's no small task.
No, it is not a small task, and that is why in the climate change discussion there is this work stream known as response measures. So response measures are looking at how actions that countries are taking to deal with climate change within their territories impact on other countries outside of their territories. And then how do you deal with that? For example, the way we're trying to decarbonize the economy, and that's what the IPCC, again, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says, is by the end of this century, we should have gone out of fossil fuels, coal and oil. But what it means is that a lot of countries that depend on those industries will have a major effort of diversification. So these are issues that the climate discussions are taking into account, because it's not just an environmental negotiation, it has a lot of implications for development, and that's a package.
Well, the ILO has a role to play in that conversation. We might talk about a little bit later on in this chat the guidance that the ILO has put out on managing that transition. I've got a question come in from Kiran. She wants to know, do we have evidence that greener economies create more and better jobs? Which economic sectors offer the best and most opportunities? In fact, I was about to come on to that issue of, because we spent some time on challenges, on the opportunities that are presented by this transition.
Well, first, I think it's important that we bear in mind that there are many challenges, but the opportunities are greater. We have more opportunities to create decent work. We have more opportunities to promote social justice and protect the vulnerable. Now, in the ILO, we have done work looking at what a shift to low carbon and a green economy could mean for jobs, running scenarios on a business as usual development pathway compared to what we call a green economy development pathway. So we find that by going green, there's an opportunity to create up to 60 million additional jobs by 2030. So it's massive, it's in many sectors. And of course, one important sector, which is at the core of climate action, because it's a major source of emissions, is the energy sector. And it's also in the energy sector that today we see a massive growth in jobs. The International Renewable Energy Agency, which is the international organization very much looking at this transition towards clean energy, published just last week their 2016 of the report on renewables and jobs. And that report is talking of 8 million jobs today in the renewable energy sector. So it is very important, and by doubling the share of clean energy in the energy mix by 2030, we'll be talking of 24 million jobs in that industry. So it's very significant. You look at a country like China. China today accounts for nearly half of those jobs in the renewable energy sector, but China is looking at 25 million green jobs by 2030. So it's massive, and the massive opportunities not only for countries that have gone first in this area, the industrialized countries, but many developing countries as well.
And I guess what I'm hearing in what you're saying there, Kamal, is that the time for being reactive in the sense to the challenge that's coming is past. It's time to be proactive, plan, accommodate, seize opportunities.
No, absolutely. And I think that is the signal that we got from world leaders in Paris, where this agreement was adopted just following the adoption of the 2030 development agenda. So waiting for climate impacts to be on us is not an option. We would not be able to advance our own mandate in the ILO, in the world of work, to promote jobs and protect people unless climate change is controlled, that decisive action is taken on climate change. And I think we have understood that very well. Our constituents, governments, workers, and employers are very much active in this process. I'm just coming from the Bonn session following the Paris discussion and the UN Environment Assembly, and you see that we had governments, workers, employers all busy in that process of following up on the climate agreement and making sure that action happens on the ground.
This is ILO Live on Facebook. Our subject today, green jobs. We very much want to hear from you. Have you been affected by climate change in the way you do your work? Has your job changed? Do you have more hot days and unable to work as much as you used to? If any of those things apply to you, do share your experiences. Go to Facebook, to the ILO, International Labour Organization page, and add your comments there. Kamal, talking about the implementation of the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, it came down last year, was a significant milestone agreement, but it's a long way from being implemented. Just walk us through the steps between where we are now and where we need to be before the rubber hits the road.
Well, the agreement was adopted in December, and it was open for signature just in April. And what's important to mention is that a lot of countries have already gone to sign the Paris Agreement. Now it needs to be ratified by 55 countries, or be able to reach a level where those countries ratifying account for 55% of the total greenhouse gas emissions, and the agreement will enter into force. But now what is more important is that countries go back home and implement what we call the nationally determined contributions. And those nationally determined contributions are national action plans that countries individually and voluntarily committed to. So that's where action is going to take place. And for us, we would like to see that action account for the social and employment dimensions of climate change.
In that sense, the ILO's mandate to consult amongst the three major elements of economic society, government, workers and business. This is going to be important, isn't it? The tripartite social dialogue.
No, absolutely, because not in all countries have workers, employees and government be heavily involved in the process of those nationally determined contributions, and understandably, because countries were rushing to get their NDCs ready before the Paris conference. But now that the time is to go back and look at specific policy measures in the energy sector, in industry, in the agricultural sector that countries are going to implement, we have an opportunity for our constituents to be involved in that process, play their role, and countries are open. I had a chance just at UNEA, the UN Environment Assembly in Nairobi, to speak with Minister Amina Mohammed, the Federal Minister of Environment in Nigeria. She's very open to have the world of work, trade unions and employers be part of the way Nigeria is going to implement its national climate change action. So we should seize that moment and make sure that we act on climate change in the way that promotes jobs and a just transition for all.
You're listening to ILO Live on Facebook, the subject, green jobs. Now, here we're talking about rubber hits the road. We've had a question come in from Peter. What do you do with petrochemical engineers and other workers whose skill sets are based on unsustainable technologies? This is this question of a transition for the individual in that industry. What happens to them?
Well, if you think of a petrochemical engineer or engineers in general, these are typically workers that have portable skills. Engineering, you can deploy it in a range of economic sectors. So it's a matter of just having the policies that will allow that shift in labor markets. And if you look at a country like China, where we just talked about 1.5 million jobs that are going to be lost in the coal sector, China is looking at ways to absorb that workforce. There's massive reforestation programs where opportunities will come for those workers. So I think we're talking more of transformations in the labor markets. Some in losing in some particular occupations will certainly be able to move and shift to other economic sectors. And when I think of an engineer, for me that's a typical case of a portable skill that could be deployed. And if you see the majors in the oil sector, they're also becoming some of the most important players in the renewable energy industry. So the opportunities, I would say, are there for any of those workers.
So, Peter, your skills may not go to waste. You're listening to ILO live on Facebook, and if you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear them. Go to our Facebook page and add your comments there. So, we talked briefly about a guidance that the ILO has put together to help manage this just transition. Tell me about the key elements in that guidance.
Well, the ILO has recognized early that this transition would need guidance. So in 2013, here at the International Labour Conference, we had a committee that discussed sustainable development, decent work and green jobs. And that committee came up with a set of conclusions and a resolution, and that went to a tripartite meeting of experts. We had 24 experts, 8 coming from governments, 8 from workers, 8 from employees. And those experts devised these guidelines that we call guidelines for a just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies for all. And basically they define guiding principles. And these guiding principles, they take principles of international law that we have common but differentiated responsibility in dealing with climate change. They recognize that some have more capacity than others. But then importantly, they point to 9 policy areas in terms of macroeconomic and growth policies, sector policies, enterprise policies, labor market policies, social protection, where governments and social partners have defined what they need to do to deal with this transition in a way that will make it just and fair for all. So it's a very powerful, very significant instrument, and that one that we, as a World of Work, hope to use in our contribution to climate action in the future.
So a plan is well away. We've got one more topic to address before we go, and that is the Green Initiative. The Director General launched several initiatives a few years ago. One of them was the Green Initiative. What is the Green Initiative and how does it fit into this conversation?
Well, the Green Initiative is a very important dimension of the Future of Work initiative. And it's a step change in the ILO in the sense that it recognizes that a future of work that doesn't recognize and account for the changes that environmental degradation, resource scarcity will mean for the future of work would have overlooked an important policy driver. So it's allowing us to have a platform for dialogue and engagement of our constituents in this transformation. It is going to help us build the knowledge base that we will need to inform policies. We know that jobs are going to be lost in some sectors, jobs will be created in some other sectors, others will be transformed, but what is the net impact, getting better understanding more specifically in different industries, the occupations. Now the question we had about petrochemical engineers, how can we deal with those? So that knowledge base is something we hope to scale up in the Green Initiative. It is going to allow us to build strategic partnerships, because this is a major agenda that the ILO alone won't be able to tackle, so we have to forge and expand our partnership with the International Organization of Employers, the International Trade Union Confederation, but other partners that we have been working with, the UN Environmental Programme, the OECD, the Bretton Woods institutions, and collectively see how we can better support our constituents at the national level, provide policy advice, but policy advice that is very much informed by sound knowledge, sound analysis of what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, and what's the best course of action.
Well, if you want more detail on that or any of the work of the Green Jobs Unit, the way to find out is to go to our website, ilo.org. I think we'll leave it there. Green Jobs Policy Specialist Kamal Gueye, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks a lot, Peter, and thanks a lot for...
It's been a real pleasure. If you would... Oh, hang on, we've got a last question coming in. I think we'll have time for this, Kamal, if it's okay with you. The ILO, this comes from Mathieu, the ILO now provides corporate social responsibility material and norms directly to companies. Has this new method borne any fruit? Are companies more competent, rather than states, to promote sustainability?
Well, Mathieu, this is a very important question, and I think that what we're seeing today is enterprises realizing that there are changes not only in the way the economy functions, a message from the financial markets, institutional investors, but also consumer demand. They're realizing that there are opportunities emerging, new economic sectors, environmental goods and services. And what I would say is that they're moving even beyond the typical corporate social responsibility and really embedding environmental sustainability in the way they function. And I think, as we have today here in the ILC, discussion on global supply chains, it's an important part of that discussion as well. How large companies, in the way they reshape their production processes, can shift that down and translate it into their supplier channels and help smaller companies also be part of that change. So that's a very important process taking place now, and our office in the ILO, our unit multilaterals, multinational companies is doing very important work, and we see quite some uptake by companies in this area.
Indeed, a lot of interest in that subject on our social media and other websites. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Kamal, thanks very much for your time. If you've missed any of this conversation, it will be on our Facebook page in full in a few short moments. We thank you for joining us today.